Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the closing plenary and closing keynote of the EU and International Affairs Conference on behalf of the four organizing institutes, the two Institutes for European Studies of the two Free Universities of Brussels, the UN University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies, and Egmont, the Royal Institute for International Relations. Before turning to the keynote, please allow me to express, as conference chair, that's my first and only chance I have during the conference, to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to all those hands and brains who've ensured a very smooth preparation and I believe also a very smooth conduct of the fourth edition of the EUIA conference. With each edition, I have to say, I think we cannot do better, or my team cannot do better, our team cannot do better with each edition that follows. You have proven me wrong. So there are too many names that would need to be named. I cannot name all of them. So let me just mention the lead coordinator of the conference again, Alexander Matela. So he takes all the thanks on behalf of the others, but the others are definitely in my mind and in our mind. Thanks very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my particular pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, European Commissioner for Trade, KAREL de Gucht. There are, again, too many stations on his political career to mention. Let me just say that he was a member of the Flemish Parliament, a member of the Belgian House of Representatives, a member of the European Parliament, as well as Minister for International Trade, Minister for Foreign Affairs and European Affairs, and Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium. He was also European Commissioner for Development and Humanitarian Aid, and obviously he is Commissioner for Trade. Some of you may recall that Commissioner de Gucht addressed also the second EUIA conference in 2010, at a time when the impact of the financial and economic crisis was still evolving and was actually for some time overshadowed by the outbreak of an Icelandic volcano. Times have further changed since 2010. While the fallout of the Icelandic volcano has faded, the EU is still grappling with the impacts of the financial and economic crisis. The crisis has even been joined by what might arguably be called a legitimacy crisis of the EU. Since 2010, also the area of trade has evolved significantly in interaction with and in response to these crises. Not least, we have seen the launch of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership negotiations. And that obviously brings us then to Commissioner de Gucht. We are most eagerly awaiting, obviously, your keynote. And let us also mention that this is on the eve of the European elections. So Commissioner de Gucht, we are very honored to have you. The floor is yours.
President and ladies and gentlemen, I see that you have been working very hard for a very long time because the flowers get to their very end. I hope that you suffered less. Now, good morning. Trade is the hallmark of globalization, that is to say, the growing interdependence of countries. And that interdependence expresses itself by means of trade, investment, capital flows and migration, but also through the exchange of ideas and culture. Globalization has been an undoubted source of a lot of good, but it is also seen as a source of evil, be it for social, environmental or even cultural reasons. The relationship between trade policy and globalization is an interesting political and intellectual question. Should trade policy narrowly focus on connecting national economies to the global market and leave broader institutional affairs to other policy fields? Or should it take a more political approach and try to influence some of the other numerous dimensions of globalization? I will argue that we should choose the second, broader approach. Trade policy can and should contribute to maximizing the benefits of globalization and equally to minimizing its drawbacks. The first question I will address is therefore, how can trade policy contribute to maximizing globalization's benefit? The most direct answer is that trade policy can contribute to unleashing the strong growth potential of trade and investment. This holds especially true for Europe. In the coming years, and starting 2020, 90% of economic growth will be generated outside this continent. And even though domestic demand is still the biggest component driving economic activity, robust external demand will thus be an ever more important source of growth. To this end, a clear-cut policy that reduces barriers to our trade and investment is imperative. In the same way, trade can also be a lever for the less well-off in the world, the developing and least developed countries. And for that, it is important to grant developing countries market access for products in which they are competitive and not to close our markets for protectionist reasons. To maximize all of these benefits of trade, we are thus working hard to reduce the barriers that hinder it. The Treaty of Lisbon recognizes this principal goal of trade policy by codifying the, and I quote, progressive abolition of restrictions to international trade, end of quote, as a constitutional objective. We are pursuing this objective bilaterally with our individual trading partners as well as in wider group negotiations and multilaterally through the World Trade Organization. Our bilateral trade policy needs to ensure that trade negotiations are not just numerous, but also deep. Our negotiations are therefore considering a whole set of restrictions that govern international economic activity. Our agreements contain ambitious chapters on trade and services liberalization, and at the same time, they include provisions on topics that go beyond the traditional scope of trade policy, such as public procurement, intellectual property rights, and services liberalization. We are currently negotiating a wide range of such bilateral free trade agreements. And during my tenure as Commissioner, we have implemented FTAs with South Korea, Colombia, Peru, Central America. They are to be followed by agreements with Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine in the very near future, and I'm also optimistic that in the next few weeks we can turn our political deals with Singapore and Canada into final legal agreements. We are working very hard on the so-called economic partnership agreements with three major regions in Africa: ECOWAS, that's the west of Africa, the East African Community, that's the east, and SADC, the south. Finally, we are in the process of investment talks with China. And this list doesn't even include the key negotiations with the economic heavyweights that I have started as a Commissioner, the talks with Japan, and most prominently, the transatlantic trade and investment partnership negotiations with the US. All of these trade negotiations will have, and some already are having, significant impact on the overall position of the EU within the web of international relations. But this holds especially true for our talks with the US. Most directly, TTIP fulfills an important role in boosting European growth. It is projected that to add 0.5% to our annual economic output to what it otherwise would be, and will therefore help us to grow faster. But TTIP will also bolster our broader ability to maximize the benefits of globalization. At this conference on the EU in international affairs, we have discussed issues ranging from EU external action to security policy. In all of these areas, the position of the EU and its leverage will be stronger if it is part of a transatlantic partnership that also contains an enhanced trade and investment link. Take the issue of European energy security. Recent events make this policy field a particularly evident example of how TTIP can bring tangible strategic advantages. TTIP is also an opportunity for us to ensure that global economic exchange is underpinned by a set of minimum standards and rules. By working together on regulatory issues with the US, we increase the chances that our shared high level of environmental, health and social standards will also be adopted worldwide. At the same time, we are pushing for ambitious agreements with our trading partners, and we remain aware that bilateral accords are always second best. And that is why we have been extremely active within the framework of the WTO to bring about further multilateral trade liberalization. Last December at the Bali Ministerial Conference, the WTO achieved the most important negotiating success since its creation back in 1994. In fact, one could say that we have saved the multilateral trade liberalization process, and it was high time. The Bali package is a good example of the greater role that EU trade policy can play in making the most of globalization. Its core success, the deal on trade facilitation, is chiefly about facilitating growth in developing countries. It is essentially a way for countries to cut red tape at their borders and to become more efficient and effective traders. And this should save developing countries roughly 325 billion euros per year, and the EU has firmly committed to assisting them in the process. We will provide 400 million euros over 5 years for trade liberalization on top of what we are already investing in developing countries, development aid and other forms of cooperation. Vice versa, trade policy can contribute and should to minimizing the drawbacks of globalization. Globalization is not per se harmful, but trade may indirectly exacerbate negative situations and circumstances, from sweatshops to illegal logging. We can most effectively tackle these issues through international cooperation that addresses their underlying causes head-on. Most importantly, international environmental and labor rights agreements and principles. However, realistically, trade policy can contribute to solving these problems. And indeed, we have employed trade measures wherever possible to address social, environmental and even political problems. First, as already mentioned, all our bilateral trade agreements contain sustainable development chapters. They address the difficult issue of social, labor and environmental standards and recognize that trade and investment should not be promoted at the expense of labor rights or environmental regulation. At the same time, our FTAs are part of the overall institutional relations with our partner countries, which in turn require respect for human rights. In our agreements, the human rights clauses constitute a so-called essential element, and this means that the non-implementation of human rights obligations can ultimately lead to the suspension of the trade agreement. We are also using our bilateral trade agreements as a lever to promote human rights. A good example of this is our agreement with Colombia and Peru. Because of the incentive of our trade agreement, we were able to push for specific action by the Colombian government on improving public safety in the country and for trade union activists in particular. Second, we promote human rights in specific cases whenever necessary. I have initiated, together with the International Labour Organization, a compact with Bangladesh in response to the tragic industrial accidents in its textile sector, most prominently the Rana Plaza incident last year. The compact lists clear commitments on the part of Bangladesh to reform its labour law and to improve working conditions. And it is working. The Bangladeshi government has not only revised domestic law, but also employed an impressive number of additional work safety inspectors. Importantly, the compact also enlists companies in this effort. As an example, the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh has been signed and implemented by dozens of leading international companies. The European Union has a special influence and responsibility in the case of Bangladesh for a clear reason. The EU is Bangladesh's largest trading partner. Also, owing to our openness as part of the Everything But Arms preference scheme, Bangladeshi exports to our market make up around 10% of that country's GDP. We have also started many other initiatives to make trade a tool for sustainable development, including our proposal for an integrated EU trading strategy for minerals from conflict areas. It aims to help break the link between minerals extraction, minerals trading, and the financing of armed conflicts. It will do this through a range of measures, including an EU system of self-certification for importers of these minerals. Again, this is a good example of how trade policy can play a key role in our overall external policy. And in fact, I have worked closely with High Representative Catherine Ashton in preparing and proposing this initiative. Third, our preference schemes, which offer easier access to the EU's single market for developing countries, have all been designed to underpin sustainable development. To benefit from the generalized system of preferences, countries need to respect the principles of core international human rights and labour conventions. And under the additional GSP Plus scheme, we sweeten this offer even further, but only if countries go further by ratifying and implementing an additional number of international conventions on the environment and good governance. At the moment, 13 countries benefit from this system. Finally, we are making use of the WTO dispute settlement body, wherever necessary, to stand up not just for our economic interests, but also for our values. Thus, we have defended the EU's ban on the importation and marketing of seal products against WTO challenges by Norway and Canada. Both the ruling of the appellate body this week and the panel report last November were squarely in our favour. They confirmed that the EU's ban on seal products is justified on moral grounds. In other words, we have successfully defended our principles of animal welfare at the WTO. Trade policy not only raises issues of fairness between countries, but also within countries. It is often said that inequality within many developed countries has grown over the last quarter of a century, and that trade, especially with Asia, has been a principal culprit. There is no denying that in many OECD countries, and especially the US, income and wealth inequality has gone up. But it is still a moot issue how much of that is due to international trade and capital and labour mobility, and how much is attributable to technological change that has reduced the demand for low-skilled and semi-skilled workers. But anyway, trade policy can respond to this by foreseeing long transition periods for vulnerable sectors, and governments should flank market opening with active labour market policies to equip people to stand competition. Also, if as a result of liberalisation it becomes harder to tax certain categories of income or consumption, more tax cooperation is called for, which is shaping up well in the framework of G20. Trade policy can also play a direct role in the so-called high politics. And this role is anchored in the Lisbon Treaty. It states that the EU's trade and investment policy must be coherent, and I quote, coherent with the principles and objectives of the Union's external action. End of quotation. Most recently, this has become very evident in the case of Ukraine. At my suggestion, the Commission has put forward a proposal for autonomous trade measures which implement in advance the tariff preferences for Ukraine that it would receive once our bilateral free trade agreements enters into force. The measures were passed by the EU institutions at record speed. They are an essential component of our broader efforts to aid Ukraine in these difficult times. Vice versa, trade sanctions can be an effective tool of external action if they are applied prudently. This has become evident in the case of Iran, and we stand ready to take action regarding Russia's involvement in Ukraine if the situation requires it. President, ladies and gentlemen, the EU's share in global prosperity is bound to shrink. It is not a source of sorrow as it results from the rise of previously poor economies. All the same, the EU is projected to still be the world's second largest economy in 2050. And in any case, it will remain an interesting subject of study for scholars of international affairs in the decades to come. I encourage you to continue your study of the EU's role on the global stage. If we aim to be influential in shaping globalization, we have to constantly strive to improve our policy approach. And for that, we need ideas, we need your ideas. We need a broad discussion about what the policy should look like. But this discourse has to be grounded in facts and logic if it is to be meaningful. Conferences like these are valuable occasions for such discussions. Trade can indeed be a powerful policy tool for a better world, and so let's try to make full use of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very, very interesting speech on the trade policy of the European Union with the different aspects and the different goals of this politics. And you say at the end of your speech that you need ideas, and so one opportunity to have some ideas is to begin the discussion with the room. So we have, I think, about 15 minutes of discussion. I know that the first question is always the most difficult, so who wants to begin with a question? Maybe I can ask to introduce yourself before? Yes.
For the conference, I'm a research fellow at the Institute for European Affairs at the Anyhow, because your speech was very comprehensive and very interesting, full of data, and you've mentioned all sorts of countries. I've heard, I think, only once or twice Russia or Ukraine, and these are very complicated. So I was wondering, how would you define the current relationship with Russia and Ukraine? And that's it.
So, a very large question.
I've said a couple of days, I don't know, maybe weeks ago, that if we were to have a new Cold War, that it would take much shorter time, but that those that come out victoriously would be the same. And I think that also Putin has understood that. Because there's a difference between do the annexation of the Crimea, or to have a vast outreach into a country like Ukraine. And you have seen over the recent days that Putin has calmed down. He has said, I'm going to respect the result of the elections. I think he will continue to spread some trouble, you know. And that may also make a number of problems in the future. You could, for example, fear that if he is going away from the military option, that he would focus more on trade, for example, and have a lot of trade disputes with its neighbors, not only with Ukraine, but also with other neighboring countries. You could, I don't know whether I would say expect, but I would not be completely surprised if that happens. But the idea that you can go back or that he could go back to a version of what the USSR was, that's completely false, I believe. I don't know whether you have observed that, but when this thing in the Crimea happened, all of a sudden Mr. Lukashenko, who is the president of Belarus, said that he didn't like it. Although he's one of the people that likes Putin most, no? So he has been scaring his neighbors, not only Georgia and Ukraine, Moldova, or the Baltic states, but also the others. He has been scaring them. Kazakhstan, for example, would like to become a member of the WTO as soon as possible, because they don't want to be alone in the room with the Russians, you know. So I'm rather, I wouldn't say comfortable about this, but we should not be too scared either. One of the big mistakes we have been doing over the last years is that we didn't do anything, truly very little, if not anything, about our energy problem. We have had already 2 times problems in Ukraine that the tap was closed, you know, and nevertheless very little happened over the last years, very little. Of course, the European Commission will be blamed for that. We are blamed for everything. We are the universal scapegoat. You know what happens in the Bible with the scapegoat? You put all the sins on his back, and you send him to the desert. No? But maybe you have also already seen that a scapegoat is never joyful. And we are the universal scapegoat, but it is the member states, you know, that over the last 5 years have refused to take serious action with respect to energy. Have not reacted when it to the policy of Russia to cut the internal market into pieces with non-re-exportation clauses, for example. We have now reacted with the European Commission with a case against Gazprom. Probably, most probably before the end of the mandate, there will also be a decision on that. But it has been the Commission. And why is that? Because, well, the Russians, they are, of course, they know something about tactics. And they give a somewhat better price to a member state and a somewhat higher price to another one, you know. It's a carrot and a stick. But it is, as a big economy, it's simply foolish to trap into that, you know, to trap into that play. We should make sure that we have a common energy policy, that we negotiate with the Russians as a bloc, that we do something about our energy independency, invest more, but probably in a more economic way or competitive way in alternative energy. We should interconnect our grids, which is one of the reasons that the Russians can singularize an individual member state, because the grids are not connected. Now, that's not costing, it's costing a lot of money. That's, I don't have it in my pocket, but it would cost a couple of billion of euros, which is feasible for such a big economy over a couple of years. It's perfectly feasible to do so. We haven't done so. I will also hope that we can have other sources like the United States, but it's not only shale gas that is going to resolve our problems. Huh? I mean, you have to transport it also, and that's a rather expensive thing. But there are all other sources for energy. You know that my country, Belgium, is not dependent at all from the Russians. Not at all, 1 or 2%. So we are not that stupid, you know. People always think that, but we are not. I mean, 1 or 2%, but we have gas from Norway, from Algeria, from Qatar. So we have diversified, and then a number of other member states have never invested in that, never. So there remains a lot to be done, but this is feasible. And you know why? Because when you look at the Russian economy, and you take out the extractive sector, minerals, oil and gas, and gold and diamonds, nothing much is left, you know. Then it is a rather weak economy once you take that off. And even for those sectors, they need our technology. So they are not such a strong economy. I've always asked myself why they are part of the BRICS, you know. Because I have never seen anything emerging over there. No, I'm serious. I'm not laughing. What has really emerged there? As, let's say, new developments and growth, sustainable growth, not much, nothing in fact. So we should be prudent. You have always to be prudent in life. We should not be scared, and we should be firm, telling them very clearly, look, that's the red line. If we do that together, and I think we have finally understood, then we can perfectly master this. That's a little bit the problem with Europe, you know. Europe is like a donkey. Eh? He has to stumble twice before he understands. No? But once we have understood, we can act and react and put our act together. And I think I'm quite sure that is going to happen in the coming years.
Thank you very much for your very frank. I saw that Mario Tello was the first who asked to have a question, and now we have many, many different questions. So.
Well, thank you very much for providing us with this, the benefit of your extraordinary experience, international experience. In particular, I would like to address the governance question. Take stock of your experience for maybe suggesting some improvement for the future. I have to say that sometimes you talk as a foreign minister. That could be, it's not a joke. Sometimes the strength of the trade commissioner is such that you included in your speeches so many political dimensions, not only trade, but the link between trade security, energy security, and political dimension is so strong in your approach, and I like it. However, the Treaty of Lisbon was expected a little bit to change the governance of the external relations, and the High Representative was expected to address three main tasks, not only chairing the Council for Foreign Relations and head of the External Action Service, but also Vice President of the Commission. Well, many people in this room are convinced that this third or second, maybe, mission has not been very much accomplished. The record is quite poor as the Vice President of the Commission. Do you think that is only typical of the first period of the Lisbon Treaty implementation? Is a kind of baby in the European External Action Service and so on, the new function, or maybe is a deeper problem of governance which could be solved by changing governance, by deputies, high representative in the committee, or maybe it's a problem that the treaty is expecting too much from one single person, and we need maybe to improve the treaty.
I propose to take two other questions. There it was, and after that, I will take a question at the front of the room, not only behind. So, Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner, for sharing with us your thoughts. Since I'm coming from Ben Gurion University of the Negev Desert, I couldn't resist your invitation to take you with me back to the desert. My question has to do, you've mentioned that trade policy can also play a role in high politics. Thus, my question has to do, how do you see the role of the Union in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And of not less importance is, of course, the issue of the Arab Spring countries. Thank you, sir.
Yes, and now I will take a question in the back of the room.
Good afternoon, I'm Ruben Wong from the University of Singapore. I wanted to ask about the EU's relations with China. For part of your speech, you mentioned the, what I would call conditionality clauses, which were written into the agreements, FTAs with countries in Latin America. These have been agreements which, these have been the clauses which have stymied conclusions of agreements in Asia. South Korea and Singapore, of course, accepted. So do you see in future a disentanglement of trade agreements with some of these social value kind of conditionalities? Because these things have actually stopped the EU and China from having a third generation partnership and cooperation agreement, and yet relations have been going on pretty well. And do you see a strategic mission for the EU in Asia?
So I think you have many different questions and very important questions.
Where are you from?
I'm from Ben Gurion University of the Negev, and my name is Sharon Parham.
Is that in the Negev desert? I didn't know that. Well, then you are, I mean, yes, you can have it, the role of my scapegoat, no problem. You're used to it. No, you are used to the desert, I mean. Yeah, maybe you better put a head, but apart from that, I mean, it's okay. Let's talk about the conditions immediately after the meeting. That's not the first time that this has been said to me, that I sometimes talk more like a Minister of Foreign Affairs. Probably it has to see with the fact that I have been a Minister of Foreign Affairs. And also, José Manuel Barroso is sometimes saying that to me. And he understands it because before he became Prime Minister and President of the European Commission, he was also Minister of Foreign Affairs. Now, on the other hand, I believe that for a number of reasons, you know, trade is very close to geopolitics. It is very close to it. In fact, for the biggest economy in the world, it's about external economic policy. That's what it is really about. How do you position yourself in the world, the present world and the future world? And for example, an agreement with the United States has a geopolitical element in it. No? It's because I believe that the next big battle in trade is about norms and standards and regulations and disciplines, you know. Now, it's obvious that if we want to be in the lead of that evolution, that we will have to do it together. Maybe joined afterwards by some other countries, but yes, this is geopolitics, but not the same way that the Americans look at it. The Americans look at it from a very political angle, you know. So what I'm not interested in is this theory of encirclement of China. That I don't believe in. And it doesn't make sense, I believe. But on the other hand, if we do not want to end up in a situation where the Chinese are going to oblige us to take over their standards, we will have to be in the opposite position, no? It's either or. That I very much believe in. And I could give you an example. For example, in e-cars, we have been working together with the United States even before these TTIP negotiations. And what we have seen is once that the Chinese realized that we were going forward, they have asked to participate in the discussions, which is good. I mean, I'm very much in favor of universal standards, but that are also universally observed. Huh? And And not only for standards, also for disciplines, for example. We have to do something about disciplines in subsidies. The biggest problem with China, it's about subsidies. It's not about wages. It's not about technological evolution. It is about subsidies in all kind of ways, you know, with cheap loans, free land, package deals, export credits, non-performing loans that keep on the books, and so on and so on. I mean, and this is it's a real vast problem, you know. If you want to address that, we will certainly have to do that together. So yes, there is an important element of geopolitics in this. Now, on the role of the higher-up vice president, that you are the president of the council, you know, that in these matters, CFSP and CFDSP decides by unanimity, or at least consensus, and that on the other hand, you are vice president of a commission where the rules, the normal rules of decision-making in the Commission apply, which means by majority. No? If there is no agreement in the European Commission, you vote, and that happens, you know. People think it never happens, but it does. And first of all, the fact that it can happen is already influencing the whole mood of the discussions, you know. If you are in a discussion, you know that at a certain moment in time you can be confronted with the vote, you take that into account. But it happens that we vote. Recently we had it on a very, very important issue, that had to see with state aid in renewables, and what should be the criteria for that. It's very political, and it was a vote. And it's also in the Treaty of Lisbon that as a vice president of the European Commission, she is bound by the rules of the decision-taking in the European Commission. So there is an inherent contradiction, you know, that's can only lead to a schizophrenic situation, because on the one hand, okay, you have to follow the lines of the European Commission, where you have a lot of other commissioners that have also external competences, no? And that, of course, are also eager on their competences. No? Not everybody is as easy as I am. And on the other hand, you have the Council of Ministers, where you have 28 ministers of foreign affairs that are also eager. No? So, I mean, automatically you end up in a very schizophrenic situation. Now, Cathy has never really engaged in this role of vice president. A little bit, but not much. I have always worked very well together with her, for example, also on conflict minerals. I have never had any problem with her. But she doesn't really engage in that role, and I think there are several reasons. First, she's British, no? No, but she's very European-minded, but nevertheless she's British. So she is reasoning in this traditional approach of international policy that is much more relational than it is structural. No? In the continent, you have a number of member states that have a much more structural approach of foreign policy. No, that's not her background. No? But secondly, I don't know if you engage in that, how physically you would do that, you know. That's the second problem. Because this lady has been working day and night, huh? One should realize it. Huh? And how on top of that would you have that coordinating role of everything that has to see with external policy? Now, on the other hand, I think that if you really in the future want to have a decisive role, you should combine both, because it's obvious that the strength of a structural external policy of the European Union lies much more in the external aspects of our competences as a Commission than it lies, let's say, in the traditional high external policy. So you should combine it, but how you do it, first of all, it was the first term, but on top of that, then you would really need deputies. And that's not foreseen in the treaty. So nobody really knows how you would do that. because you could find a couple of commissioners. That should not be too difficult, but the Council never accept that. Maybe they could accept if they also have a couple of deputies, but what is then your role? And what is the say you have over these people, you know, when they come from the Council? Commission, that's clear, but what's then the situation? Are they on a different level, those deputies? So it is something that will have to develop over time, but it is certainly an interesting problem of constitutional law that we are not going to tackle in the first decade, because nobody is going to start a new revision of the treaty, you know. In the Palestinian conflict, I'm a little bit hesitant to say too much about this, because we have had, you know, that in the past a couple of discussions on this, on a technical agreement, and also previously on whether or not there could be direct exports from the occupied territories, no? And there can be, and it's very clear that there can be. And we have also put into place a system whereby you can have a certification. You need a certification, in fact, that they do not come from the occupied territories. So that's an element. Is it a deciding element? I don't think so. We probably could do more, but that could only happen if you start from a common analysis of the situation. I mean, in the Middle East, and not all 28 member states have the same analysis. We should be clear about that. So this is it's a very difficult, it's a minefield where what you really need is a political breakthrough. There has been another effort, broad effort by John Kerry to come to a political breakthrough, and nevertheless he had to come to the same conclusion that it wouldn't work. So it's not up to me at, what is it, 20 to 1 to all of a sudden come with a solution. So I'm not going to do that. There was a question on conditionalities, no? Oh yes. But I could give you a couple of answers. No? First of all, a number of member states, but also the European Parliament, would never agree to a trade policy without conditionalities. Never. I have to calm it down a little bit, because in the end I'm not a human rights negotiator either. No? It's still about trade. No? But look at, for example, the conditionalities you mentioned with respect to Colombia and Peru, although human rights was already in the treaty as an essential element, which could lead to suspending the agreement. European Parliament insisted to have a compact whereby there are very clear obligations to be fulfilled by Colombia. No? And by the way, you have had the same approach in the United States. So a trade policy without conditionalities, forget about it. It didn't make a problem, did make a real problem with Singapore. That, by the way, the conditionalities are in what they call the PCA, and that is then followed by the trade agreement. But you cannot have a trade agreement without the PCA, so in any case they are intimately linked. Where we got a problem to find the right wording was about fiscal policy with respect to Singapore. No? And there you, of course, have a changing landscape internationally, very clearly so. Now, with respect to China, to mainland China, the reason that they have asked to start negotiations on a free trade agreement, you know, they have asked repeatedly, they even insist in doing so. The reason I'm not doing it is because I want first to see what they are going to do with the investment treaty, whether they make a serious effort to deliver or not. And for me, that's a litmus proof, you know, because the kind of hollow agreements that they have been making with a number of countries, recently also with European countries like Switzerland, we are not interested in. if they start talking with us on a free trade agreement and even on an investment agreement, they will have to make a number of concessions. If not, we are not interested in it. So I think it's better to first have the investment agreement, and then we'll look at a possible free trade agreement. I mean, one of my successors, obviously. But again, I don't think that it will not come about because of conditionalities. Again, there I think we can find the right solutions. But the real question is the right moment to have free trade negotiations with China? That's the real question.
So I know that there were many other questions, but I think that now it is time to end this conference. Many, many thanks to the Commissioner, many thanks to everybody, and I know it is a buffet upstairs to finish in a more informal manner. So thank you, everybody.